Welcome everyone, and tonight we're going to hear from Marina Prentoulis, who's very kindly agreed to talk to us about some of the points that she brings up in her new book, which is here, Left Populism in Europe, Lessons from Jeremy Corbyn to Podemos. And that's probably back to front in the screen, but I've read it and I think it's extremely good. I recommend it to people. Well done, Marina. And I'm very interested in what it has to teach us in the Labour Party, not only the Labour Party, but in our own particular part of it, which are the suspended people hanging from the window ledge, who are trying to find a way to keep a socialist party in Britain. And I'm particularly interested in the way in which Marina talks about the crisis in representation and the necessity for real representation to have a kind of proximity, have people to have a proximity to power, and that and the difference between a movement and a party. I think that's very interesting. A very important part of what Marina talks about is the way in which movements come together in a chain to form a party. So I won't go on now, and I'll let Marina talk, and we can talk about things with her afterwards. Would you start, Marina?
Yes, I will start, and for a minute at least I will show my face. I'm afraid of the connection because it seems unstable, and maybe I will stop the video in a minute. But thank you so much for the introduction, and I'm so glad that you enjoyed the book.
Sorry, Marina, to interrupt, but there's a voice on the line coming in from somewhere.
Is it me?
Yes, it's coming in on your when there's another voice on your.
Like an echo.
If I don't have the video on?
Yeah, it's fine now.
Okay. Well, so I showed my face for a minute. That was it.
We believe you.
And I did put my makeup on. That's unfortunate.
Well, thanks for that.
So let me talk a little bit about populism, because a lot of people don't like the term. And they don't like the term because they understand populism in a different way than the way I understand it. So usually people talk about populism as if it has to do with leaders, that they are lying to their voters and they're very authoritarian and so on. But this, I think, has to do mainly with the newspapers and how they talk about populism, and also because some of the people who write within populism, they are afraid of any challenge to the existing institutions of liberal democracy. Because populism, in the way that I understand it, it is an anti-establishment. So how do I understand populism? And it's a lot of work that has been done on that. So populism, and the people who started to talk about populism, they understood populism as a critique of Marxism. They are post-Marxist, let's say. In what sense? In the sense that class does not have necessarily the privileged position that it has in classical Marxism. That doesn't mean that class is not there, because a lot of people try to accuse a lot of populists for that. It means that we believe that it is in the process of the struggle that, and as different demands and groups come together, that one category, it could be around class, but it could be around democracy or other things, that it will unite all these diverse demands. So class does not have a privileged position. Now, I believe that some of these people who write on populism, they went too far and they should bring class back in. But again, I agree with them that it doesn't have the economic determinism, populism, or these theories, at least, that you find in traditional Marxism. A lot of people who deal with populism, they start from Gramsci onwards. So they try to downplay a little bit this privileged position of the economy. And the reason they try to do that is that they were trying to understand what happened in the movements of the 60s and the 70s. So we had these movements like the movements in the Paris May, 68 and so on, that a lot of communist parties didn't like them very much. They didn't like them, they didn't necessarily know how to deal with them. They didn't have the working class labor characteristics and demands that they were expecting, and for this reason they dismissed them. And I think this is very unfortunate. The same happened in Greece with the Indignados. So I was doing some research on the newspapers of the period, and most of the criticism, it was coming from the Communist Party of Greece, which is very traditional communist, Stalinist party. So they didn't like the Indignados. They didn't like when the people took the squares. And the reason they didn't like it is because it was all sorts of different people, very diverse demands. They were not speaking the communist language that they were expecting. So what they did is they called their own demonstrations. They disassociated themselves. And they called the people who were in the squares disillusioned, that they will be unable to challenge capitalism and so on. The problem with that is that the Communist Party, although there was such a huge crisis in Greece, they never managed to get over the percentage that they traditionally have, which is about 5 to 7%. That's it. You had a huge crisis and you had a Communist Party that it wasn't part of what was going on in the streets and so on. So the first thing is that I believe that sometimes because they don't have the characteristics, the class labor characteristics they expect that they will have. My position is different, is that you engage with the struggles and you try to move the situation towards more radical demands. But this is how things happen, and this is when people, the first people that they started to write about populism had in mind, they wanted to think how different demands can be connected, and demands that they were not necessarily the traditional labor demands. They also wanted to put more emphasis on what was happening in the 60s and 70s in terms of feminist demands and other demands that we had at that period, which again, communist parties, and I have in my mind the traditional communist party like the Greek one, they were downplay them as struggles. So feminism, race, they are not a big part of their discourse. So much that we had a case where the Communist Party of Greece, not many years ago, came out and it said that homosexuality is a problem of capitalism, is a symptom of capitalism. And of course, it alienated a lot of people, especially the younger generation. So this is where populism comes from. And for me, populism is a big political logic. Political logic means that there are two different ways for me for doing politics. One is the populist logic, where you connect diverse demands, and these demands are against the establishment. So it is an anti-establishment logic that it wants to challenge the existing institutions. And the other big logic again, it will be the institutional logic. So you leave the institutions roughly as they are. You are not on the establishment. You continue what is already in place. In some cases, you can be very technocratic as well, as it happened in the Labour Party and other parties as well, where you effectively say that the people don't need really to engage very much in politics. We have voted for somebody, they're in power, they have experts, and these experts will run the show, and the situation will continue as it has. So there are two big demands, one populist logic and one the institutional logic for me. So big part is how you connect the diverse demands. And what I'm arguing in the book is that for this to happen, and to have parties that they had at least populist elements, they were not fully populist and they were not reading necessarily the stuff that I'm reading, you had to have a crisis, because this crisis, and I'm talking about the financial crisis of 2007 and 8, broke the political affiliations that people were feeling with certain parties. And maybe, Jane, here you will be interested in what happened with PASOK in Greece, which was the Socialist Party of Greece. Because PASOK, a New Democracy, this is the previous Social Democratic Party and the Conservatives in Greece, they were seen as the ones that they created the crisis. And it's not only that they helped the creation of the crisis, these were other economic centers and political centers as well, but they didn't have anything to offer as a solution. So the question was, okay, we have these people that they're representing us, political parties, and when there is a need, they have nothing to offer to the people. In this way, it was a big crisis of representation, and especially in Greece and Spain. So the people were not only asking for remedies for the economic crisis, they started to question the whole political system as such. And the demands from the squares, they were for a different type of politics. So they were asking for something much more radical than, okay, we need to get some money to deal with the crisis. They were asking, hang on a minute, what is this political order that it ignores the people and works for the banks and other elites, European, international, and others, and it's totally disregarding what happens with the people. So the crisis played an important role in breaking these affiliations that people were feeling with the political establishment. People that you wouldn't expect started to question the political establishment, and this is how the movements started to take place in Greece and in Spain. Now, these movements, they were not politically coherent. About their future economically, but in any other possible way. And part of these people were people that they belonged to classes that they, at that point, they were, before the crisis, they were feeling that they were quite secure in what they had. And suddenly, none of this happened. Now, some people say that the same happened in Britain, but it didn't happen in the same way in Britain. In Greece and Spain, people lost the floor under their feet. People started to jump out of windows. Their businesses went bust. They didn't know what the future of their children would hold. And people who were relatively okay and well off, they started going to food banks. So it was a very, very difficult situation. I was in one of the organizations of Syriza at that point, and we were having discussions. And one of the things that it was agreed in the squares, not in that organization, is that they wouldn't allow any political affiliations. So they stopped any political organization to come into these movements in the squares and sell newspapers or try to promote their brand of socialism or communism and so on. So there was nothing of that. It was people that they were coming together, very diverse. And I have to say, Greeks don't like, the Greek left doesn't like this idea, but there were people that they were right-wing in there as well. What it happened, and in this way, these squares, at least in Greece, they were in a way divided. The more interesting part, it was the part that we call the down square, where people started to come together to discuss new ways of representation. So they started calling assemblies every night, and people just coming together and trying to think if there is a different way to represent themselves at the electoral level, if there were different, more horizontal ways to organize the squares as well. So this was a big, big story. As I said, the main parties at that point, which was PASOK and New Democracy, their vote started to collapse, especially PASOK. And their vote collapsed, so it wouldn't be PASOK who people will look at in order to find a solution. And at that point, after the squares, the party that progressively it started to gain support, it was Syriza, which wasn't a unified party at that point. It was 12 different organizations. And that, it was a very important experiment in Greece as well, because as you know, within the left, there are very many different groups and we hate each other and we fight with each other forever. So to manage to bring these different groups together, it was already, at least for some time, it was a big thing. People who discuss the story, they say that this was also a product of movements, because a lot of these different groups, they were before involved in the European Social Forum and places like that. So they had already started in a way to work together or to discuss together, and this enabled the creation of Syriza, which was in 2004. And after the movement of the squares around 2012, Syriza started to gain electoral power. At that point, what we were believing is that Syriza would represent something different, a much more horizontal party, or what was happening in the movements will affect the structures that we had within the party. And before and a little bit after Syriza came to power, this was the case. It stopped to be so much the case after 2015, where again, what was happening within Syriza the Syriza organization stopped to work effectively. And nobody was paying attention to what was happening in the grassroots. And every time that I was asking somebody, ministers or MPs of Syriza, they were saying, oh, we don't have time for that. We need the people, we need to take control of the government, of the state, and so on. So progressively, the grassroots organizations, they started to be less active. People were still quite active as movements, because apart from the squares that I mentioned before, and this was also the case in Spain, people were organizing in order to deal with the crisis. They were organizing food banks, they were organizing solidarity surgeries, medical doctor surgeries, I mean, and there were a lot of people involved. But the funny thing there, it was that it was very political. It wasn't like food banks that we have in Britain, which are organized in sometimes even from charities or cancers and so on. It was much more political. So people will go to these places to talk politics with each other, not party politics necessarily, but to talk about how the situation can change, what it could happen, and so on. Things changed, as I said, after 2015, when Syriza signed the memorandum agreement. Now, a lot of people then lost interest in Syriza. The reality is that they held a second election because they were unable to put their program in action, and they signed a memorandum. They had to call another election. They did, they won. And they got in alliance with a right-wing party, nationalist party, and they became the new government. Now, this is another point of contention there, the fact that they collaborated with a right-wing party. The key there is that this was a new right-wing party. So it was again a party that, although it was right-wing and quite nationalist, they were not part of the previous establishment. So it was a new party that it was also adopting a very populist anti-establishment talk, saying that we have to change the country, we have to deal with corruption, we have to give people. And I think this is why for some time this coalition worked out. Now, I talked about Greece. A similar situation happened in Spain, but in Spain you didn't have a left party who started to gain power. It was Podemos, which was connected with the previous movements, M15, the Indignados movement as well. And it was a different party from Syriza in the sense that there were much younger people involved. They didn't want to talk about the left. They didn't have the same political repertoire. So people saw them as something new, again, that it could help Spain. And for some time, they had quite a lot of power. They didn't gain power, and they were expecting that PSOE, which is the PASOK, the Social Democratic Party of Spain, it would have the same fate as PASOK in Greece, but it didn't, because there was internal things changing within PSOE as well. So like with the Labour Party, within PSOE there was a leadership contest, and the old guard, let's say, lost from the new guard, which is the current prime minister. He's not that left, but he was seen as somebody who would change the party and deal with the corruption within the party. And I think this is why it didn't totally collapse in voting terms as it happened in Greece. Now, I've said these parties, Podemos and Syriza, they had populist elements in the sense that they were bringing together very diverse groups and demands. They were not only talking about the working class, and they were demanding, at least at the beginning, a different political system and a different way of representation and so on. Populist elements, none of these parties is totally populist, less so the Labour Party, I would say. Where the Labour Party created a people against the establishment, it was within the party itself. It was Corbyn. It didn't happen in the same scale that it happened in Greece and Spain, as I said, because of the crisis. But at that point, something changed within the Labour Party. There was an opportunity, of course, and the opportunity was given by Ed Miliband, enabling the leadership contest and so on, which says something that no matter how much we try to organize things and have the good strategy, part of politics is to be able to see what opportunities they are open in a given moment. And I think the more dogmatic one becomes, the more difficult it is to grasp these opportunities when they happen. So this happened in the Labour Party, and we have the leadership of Jeremy Corbyn, which, however, it didn't manage to connect, I think, with the rest of the people outside the party. Now, momentum for some people was seen as the bridge, as a movement, but with the definition that I have, momentum was never a movement. Movements don't have, you don't have to be a member of the party to be a member of a movement. And in this sense, momentum was a pressure group within the Labour Party. And a lot of the energy of that period was, of course, concentrated in winning over the Labour Party rather than opening up outside, I think, the party as well. In 2017, however, I think Corbyn was doing quite well, but I think one of the reasons, again, has to do with populism, and in this time, right-wing populism, because it is different to be the changes within the Conservative Party. So when you have Theresa May, this is establishment, and it talks establishment. And then people who want something different and they're fed up, they can go against them. But when you have Boris Johnson, it's not the same Conservative Party. It is a populist now right-wing party. The paradox there is that there is now nobody more establishment than Boris Johnson, obviously. But he has some characteristics that populist leaders have, and that makes them anti-establishment, that they don't talk the language of professional politicians, that they talk true language or true politics. And Boris has that, irrespectively of the crap that they come out of his mind. A lot of people, they see him that somebody who is not politically correct, talks like the normal people, despite the fact that he puts Latin everywhere. I think the reason he puts Latin everywhere is at the same time to remind them that, yeah, okay, he speaks true politics, but okay, he is also coming from the establishment and he's entitled to a lot of things. So I think how one will react to this is very important. It's not the same Conservative Party, and a lot of people perceive Boris in a very different way. Brexit played a role, I think, in that as well. Now, why anybody would think that Boris would care about the British people is beyond me, but it isn't, because in populism, he played this transgression that I'm the leader. Let the politician talk this crazy language that they talk. I speak the truth. I will do whatever it takes for the British people. Of course, these were lies, but they got him where he is. And I think there is a good chance that we will live with him for quite a long time. So populism sometimes, and there are a lot of people who write like that, it is a style of communicating as well. For me it is, and for me it's a political logic. And this is because I have an innate aversion to leaders. Generally speaking, I'm not very good with leaders. I don't wear t-shirts with leaders. I had one with Che Guevara when I was young. I didn't wear it very much. So for me, populism has to do with how you bring together these demands. And a lot of people believe that this can be operationalized. I think this would be a simplification because, as I said, it has to do with how the political terrain is set up. But it is important to be able to understand that at some point you have to cut across different demands if you want to be really anti-establishment, if you want to win elections, but also beyond that. I mean, I think the same processes are relevant for revolutions. It's just that I don't think any revolution is going to happen any day soon. But again, even in revolutions, you have to bring all the diverse demands together against the establishment for some time. What happens after that is, of course, a big difference. So, in terms of the Labour Party, I believe that in terms of Corbyn and what happened with Corbyn, some people will say that it is because the media were against him. This, of course, it's true, but the media will be against anybody who tries to make any difference. The same was the case with PASOK in 1981 when PASOK first came to power. And back then, PASOK in Greece was a populist party. It was a populist party because it was coming after 7 years of a dictatorship, where still the same people were occupying the state, and people, very diverse people, were fed up. They wanted to get rid of the left. And if any of you remember of the first leader, Andreas Papandreou, he was totally the image of the populist leader. The night he was elected in 1981, it was amazing how many people were in the streets of Athens dancing and celebrating until the morning. This didn't happen to that scale, even when Syriza won in 2015. In the process, of course, the party changed, as we know, and with the Labour Party, you have different phases and things change. Now, the media back then were very much against Andreas Papandreou in a similar way that they were against Corbyn, even worse, because it's Greece and the media, they are worse than the British media, if you believe it. they were even saying that he was the leader, Andreas Papandreou, of the then terrorist organization 17th of November. It was everywhere. Every newspaper, they were saying he's behind the terrorist organization, he's the leader of the terrorist organization. But even back then, what was the strength and enabled PASOK, as later it enabled Syriza to come to power, it was the people on the ground. Whatever the media would say, everywhere there were people working for PASOK in 81, as they were in 2015 in terms of Syriza. And working, I mean, not going out asking for votes, which is something that we do with the Labour Party. Being involved everywhere and expressing their anger to the establishment everywhere and organizing people and bringing them together. So I don't think the problem is only the media. I think the problem is that the way that the Labour Party is operating, if you want to win the leadership, or even if you win it, there is so much infighting going on. It takes so much energy that we forget, I say we because I'm a member of the Labour Party, that we forget to connect with the people. I felt the same in terms of, for different reasons, of course, now with Keir Starmer. I felt the same with the pandemic. So although we go out when there are elections to ask for votes, when the pandemic happened, a lot of people in different neighborhoods started to organize for mutual aid. This was happening mainly on Facebook, Twitter, and so on. A lot of them, I think they were younger people that they thought the best way to organize is on social media. And this is unfortunate because these are the people that they only understand whatever happens online, but they don't have the understanding of the neighborhood, of the needs and so on, that labor organizations will have in different parts of the country, understanding who is in need and so on. So what I didn't get, which I would have liked to get, it's a call from the Labour Party, not to go out and ask for the next election and votes and so on, but to actually actively engage with the needs of the people in the crisis. And I think this is a big problem. So in terms of, what you may understand from that is that I have more faith on grassroots organizing and movements than parties. Syriza, as I said, after they got in power, and this is where they are now, the organizations are not active anymore. I'm not a member of Syriza now. One of the reasons is because there's nothing for me to do. If I need a job, and people who need a job, they go into Syriza, they get in contact with the correct people, they get jobs within the party and things like that. But if you are an activist, there isn't anything that I can do as an activist within Syriza. The organizations occasionally meet, they gossip quite a lot, they say how fantastic they are, but they are not engaged in social change. Now, what could happen in terms of the Labour Party for the future? There are two things that I would like to hear your opinions about. One has to do with alliances, and there is a big discussion about creating, some say, progressive or democratic alliances against the Tories to win. I am skeptical about it for reasons that I can talk more about later. And the second thing, which for me is very important, is community organizing. Now, during the pandemic, I haven't been involved in meetings of the Labour Party, I mean, and stuff like that. So I don't know right now if there is space or what space there is there to engage and start organizing differently within the Labour Party. I haven't been expelled yet. I don't think anybody cares. I mean, I'm Greek. Usually, you know, they don't care, I think, very much. But I truly don't know if I should stay or go. I don't know in the sense that I don't know if there is, again, my problem is not only the leadership. My problem is, do I have anything to do if I stay in this party? Or I'm just paying some money and then I will vote for them, which is not what I do. I mean, I can do that without being a member of the Labour Party. So alliances is one thing that we could discuss, and this, to win over the Tories, and the second will be community organizing. So my question would be, if a critical mass of people inside or outside the Labour Party start to talk about community organizing, how politics should shift to the grassroots, how new initiative on the ground should start, is there space for that within the Labour Party right now or not? These are my questions for you. I think I've been talking for a long time. Again, I will put it down to being Greek and loving talking about politics. So I'll stop here and then we can discuss. I am showing my face again because I hated these black screens that you cannot see somebody. I hate it. So what do you think? Sorry, Jane, you are chairing. Jane, you are muted.
Jane, yes, you need to be unmuted. Or maybe I can.
Sorry. Yeah.
No, you are muted now.
Right. Am I unmuted now? All right. Thank you. Okay. All right. I think I understand entirely what you mean by the question of is there space in the Labour Party now as it stands for us to have any kind of grassroots organization or movement, and also the problem of why stay in the Labour Party when we can't do anything, where there's nothing for us to do because it is not a dynamic or active party. It isn't, it's not, as you say in your book, movements have something to do, they're moving. And parties tend to still that movement if they're not able to chain those dynamics one to the other in order to move in tandem. And I think certainly the Labour Party has, I think we would all agree, or at least many of us have had the direct experience of the fact that we have become alienated from any representation, largely because of that difference between the professional cadre of the Labour Party, which includes the parliamentary party and the NEC, which has in fact made it difficult to do anything other than audience politics, where the members just become an audience, and that's something that we have seen doesn't have to be the case because we have all been activists. Sorry, Norman, what you were going to say?
Yeah, I was interested to hear. I mean, I'm not interested in the two questions that Marina put forward. The one about a progressive alliance, I don't think is something that can work in our situation personally. I was interested though about community organizing and the mention that Marina made of momentum. And the very interesting thing that she said that, yes, she didn't qualify, she didn't think momentum was a movement because you had to be a member of the Labour Party to be in momentum, which wasn't the case when momentum was first started. I was involved in the setting up of the local momentum, Thanet momentum or momentum Thanet, which was before they'd kind of totally worked out all the rules of the national momentum. And we basically specifically said that we would have, that you didn't have to be a member of the Labour Party to be in momentum. And it seemed to me that in the original idea of momentum, when John MacDonald and others talked about it before even Jeremy had become leader, was that momentum would be a movement that would exist outside the Labour Party to push the Labour Party into doing things that were socially useful. And that seemed to me, and in a way it would fit very much with, I think, the experience of John MacDonald and others in the Labour Party, where they, when they were in the Greater London, the GLC, where they were basically opening their doors to loads of social movements outside any of the parties, basically just to say, come and tell us what you want, and we will try and do it. And they were kind of wonderful halcyon days for the GLC in London. They were doing all sorts of amazing things on that basis. And I think that the original idea of Momentum was that, and then later Momentum went terribly, terribly wrong and became just a sort of a canvassing arm of the Labour Party. And as far as I know, they still are, you know, operating on that basis. You still have to be a member of the Labour Party to be in Momentum. And it could be that, you know, that the way forward, but Momentum is still very much involved in community organising, and it wouldn't be at all a stretch to think that we could reform Momentum again to be back to community organising, but also to being a movement where you didn't have to be a member of the Labour Party to be in it. I'm not sure, and I'm not really involved in National Momentum now, although I'm a subs paying member of it. But it could be that it's in that area that we need to think about kind of working on the future of the Labour Party. But I do think, in closing, that I think, Marina, probably is worth at least sticking with the Labour Party for a bit longer. I think that the Labour in Exiles Network movement, which includes suspended members and current members, is going to do a lot of things to try to change the course of the party in the future. And I have no idea whether there will be any success or not, but there might be. And I think probably giving that a chance might be worth doing for at least till the end of the year. But anyway, I'll thank you very much. Thank you very much for speaking to us. That was a very interesting talk. Thank you.
Yeah, Norman, sorry.
Sorry, was there any other question there? No? Could I just ask you, Marina? I mean, you talk in your book about the performative dimension of a movement, and that when a movement says that it represents the people or speaks for the people, it brings a people into being, and that I think is something we in the Labour Party hasn't done. We didn't do that. I mean, you mentioned that that there's not enough definition really, or not enough of a fault line or a boundary when in the 99 to 1% or the many not the few, and that we didn't manage, but perhaps the right-wing populism did, in the, you know, in the sense that you hear these UKIP people say after the referendum, the people have spoken. They felt that they had been that a people had been made from a movement, and I just wondered if you had any idea why we had failed to do that, why we had failed to bring a people behind Jeremy Corbyn.
Yeah, I think, well, Jeremy Corbyn managed to create a people, as I said, mainly in the Labour Party, but electorally also it did better. But I think that there were very many different obstacles for Corbyn, and it has to do also with how it had to do with some people around him as well, I believe. So some people wanted, they wouldn't like this idea of talking about the people. They would think that we should only talk about the industrial working class. There were other people which were around that they were amazingly upper class, and they were talking in his name in the media. So I was going at that point to universities in the north of England, and it was young people, and they were saying, who are these people? Why do they speak in the name of Corbyn or the Labour Party? So I think a lot of, and that will be my criticism of Corbyn, that not only the choices that he made in terms of the people around him were the best, and I can understand that probably he was looking for people that he would trust, I don't know. but some of the people will be very resistant to these ideas. They won't talk to particular people, which are exactly the people that they are not going to listen. And they would listen to Boris and other people. I was thinking of that, and I know people, they don't like it when I say that. In terms of what happened in the local elections lately. So it wasn't good, but we had some successes. London remained Labour, Manchester remained Labour, and yet none of this was something that it seemed, at least at the beginning, that the Labour Party wanted to discuss. They wanted to discuss only the red wall. And the red wall, for me, it's a very strange concept. If you think that London has the biggest poverty among children, it is very strange to say that you don't, that's the only working class that you care. The same goes for Wales and the working class of Wales and so on. So I believe that there are certain, and in all parties this happens, not only in Labour, there are certain dogmatic ideas which they stop us from being able to address the people and to do something different. They hold us back. That's my interpretation. I know people don't like it when I say it, but in a way, for me, it is part of the problem.
Thank you. I think that's very interesting. I agree entirely with you. I've always thought that that the old terms of the Labour Party can stand in the way of making a really a true representation of the people. Is there any other question? There must be questions. Yes.
Yeah, I've had my hand up for ages.
Oh, sorry, Wanda.
Okay, I'll take it down now because everyone looks like they have a yellow Hitler moustache. Hang on a moment. Oh, I can't fiddle. Oh, we are. Hi. Right. Absolutely right about community organising, but that's not the total solution. For example, my local council candidate, absolutely brilliant. Set up an organisation. We leafleted every single door in the area, and when she phoned up afterwards for the election for a vote, she was told, "Oh, I'm voting green because I've always voted green." And these are people that she'd helped. She'd taken her shopping there and did all sorts of things. So, like I say, that's not absolutely everything. People have got to think. What I think is the solution is for people and members and supporters to be encouraged to talk to everyone, especially young people, to talk to their older relatives. And I know that's difficult because sometimes they're very stuck in their ways, but that is the solution. And I think Marina mentioned that earlier. I mean, I talk to people at bus stops, in the shops, in queues, everyone, you know. But I think we have to encourage people to do that. And the one thing that really gets me, I do a lot on Facebook. There's lots of brilliant information on there, and people keep it in private groups. So they're just talking to themselves, and outsiders can't see it. And I really think that we need to, hello, Eric. I really think that we need to do something about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Wanda. Ian, you have a question?
Yeah, you can hear me, I guess. Yeah. Sort of several things. First of all, I'd like to thank Marina for what I thought was a really thought-provoking talk. Very interesting. There are a couple of things. I would take a bit of an issue with the idea of class, because I think that the idea of class in Marx.
There's lots of feedback. I can't hear properly.
Yeah, it's not me. Yeah, I think that the idea of class in Marx is much closer to what Marina was saying than it perhaps has been understood by political parties in the last century. We could go into that, but I think Marx had a far more alive understanding of class than is perhaps generally understood today. That would be the first thing. And then the other thing I would like to, I think is really important, is the extent to which, if we're talking about Corbyn and what happened with momentum and everything else, it would be the extent to which Corbyn was always a prisoner of an extraordinarily corrupt body of people, which is the Parliamentary Labour Party. And he never ever managed to break with that. I mean, that when we talk about there should have been a movement, I do believe that there should have been. But from the start, the concentration on the parliamentary process was really debilitating for the whole of the Corbyn project. When, after December 2019, I looked at who he was working with in Parliament, and it was truly, truly, truly pathetic to see. And in fact, if you actually study who he had to work with, who he chose to work with in Parliament, it was absolutely amazing that Corbyn managed to achieve what he did. If I just look at John McDonnell's team in the Shadow Chancellor thing, I think there was about 15 of them actually appointed from, if you like, from the Parliamentary Labour Party to support John McDonnell. The closest the man had to an ally was Clive Lewis. That was the closest he came in his whole team to someone that he could trust. I'll just leave that. And I must say again, thanks so much for the presentation, because it's made me think about a lot of things and that's got to be a really, really positive thing. Thank you.
Jane, you.
Eric, I think your hand's up next. Unmute yourself, Eric. Unmute.
I was unmute.
Well done.
I keep pressing it so it mutes again. Right.
There, Eric.
Apologise if I bore you all, but I find it frustrating. I think we're trying to get too complicated in the Labour Party. We're trying to attract people who are not really into politics. So we debate all the politics within the party. My own view, sorry, it's very simple. That all we've got to do is to say, sorry, is my voice being distorted? Is my voice being distorted?
There's someone called Jane Lee's not, I'm not muted.
Yeah. Oh, I see. Right. Yeah, I find it, we're not being simple enough. What we've got to really do is to think let's talk us being socialists. We believe in government run, owned and controlled major service industries, NHS and education. Now, young people will understand that. They will understand that. We can then say, look, do you want foreign nations, countries, businesses and what have you to run those services and make profit on it? Or do you want what the Labour Party intended in the 45 government, that such important things like health, education, major service industries that should be owned, run and controlled by you, the people, through your government, and you can change that each election. To me, that's what young people want to know about, debating complexities at the Labour Party compared to the Tory Party. We're just going around in circles and young people switch off. If you took the view that wrongly probably, but those that said, oh, give us our country back about Europe, well, let's use the same thing. You know, give us our services back. We want to control and own and manage the people, our major service industries and NHS. Let's see, I mean, I can't see youngsters disagreeing with that. I just feel that I always hear the same complicated debate within the party. What did Jeremy do or didn't do, and the media love it. They love that. Any slight hint and they'll tear us to pieces. I mean, the media are never going to be with us, as we know. They're owned by people who certainly don't support us. So if we keep our message simple, we might stand some sort of chance. What are you in? Oh, well, we're socialists. And what does that mean? Well, socialism means we run, own and control major service industries, NHS, education. leave it there. That's simple. And I can't see that that would offend a lot of young people. I think it would make them think, oh, well, yeah, I didn't realise that perhaps I thought the school down the road or the health service was always owned and run by us, the people. But of course it's not. And I think that's the simple message we get across, and we'll have more success. Sorry to bore you, but I'll give up now.
It's not the young people who've got a problem, it's the old people. It's the old people who've got a problem. They're the ones who vote Tory all the time.
Yeah, you're right. I'm sure that's, when I say young, I felt they didn't understand it, but maybe I'm wrong. You're right.
Becky, were you next? Thank you, Eric. Becky?
Hi, thank you, Jane. Yeah, a couple of things occurred to me while Marina was speaking, and that's the international dimension, because there was something about Corbyn which was very popular, which we saw in 2017. And I say that as having a sister and brother-in-law who always voted Tory. They're working class Tories, and they read the Daily Mail. In 2017, they went out and voted Labour, and the reason they did was they heard new politics. It shouldn't have been new politics, but it felt like new politics, and an actual programme that they identified with as working class people. And I do think what happened to Corbyn was something slightly more complex, probably, than Spain and Greece, and that was the international dimension, because Britain has a completely different role politically in the world than Greece and Spain. And to me, it's very significant, the actual things which brought Corbyn down, not least the continual barracking about anti-Semitism, the barracking about his links with terrorists, and I'm sure Corbyn was brought down because of his international policies, not his domestic policies, his international policies. And, you know, I think that is something that has to be borne in mind when we're thinking about Corbyn. And the other thing that I'm thinking vis-a-vis the debate over the Labour Party, you know, we're seeing these by-elections, and I'm getting the feeling very much that people have adopted, and not unreasonably, that they're all the same. The political parties, they're as corrupt as each other. And I think people have adopted that view. And I think that's why in by-elections, they don't care who they're going to vote for at all. So I'm throwing that out because I'm suggesting, controversially, is the Labour Party too contaminated now? Is it just too contaminated? I've finished now, Jane. You need to unmute, Jane.
Sorry, I'm not on the ball tonight. Yeah, I think that's a very good question, and it's one that the whole populism issue brings up, isn't it? That we are no longer represented, and if people are completely alienated from our political system, how can we say that anyone's represented in the country, and that we represent ourselves in the squares, that we're going to, do we have to go into the squares as they did in Spain and Greece? But I take your points as well about the criticisms of Corbyn being from something which was rather different from in Spain and in Greece. I think, Tony, you want to say something. You've got your hand up. Tony?
Yes, thank you. My apologies, I came to this late and I missed the talk, so I've only really been able to pick up. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've only really been able to pick up from the discussion afterwards, so I may be completely off beam, for which you have to, or I hope you will forgive me. I think in retrospect, the Corbyn era, or what happened, will become to be seen as really a historical aberration, something, a once repeated experiment which will never occur again. I hope I'm wrong, but I have a great feeling that that will be the case. I think the problem really lies, I'm not enamored with the term populism anyway, because it suggests you appeal to people on a particular basis, which may not be totally honest. And I think that has occurred in the rest of Europe, which is why it's been quite insubstantial. For example, Podemos, one of the most surprising things is, I mean, because they were in government in Spain, that they didn't make it a precondition that the Catalan prisoners were released, which I think is a major democratic issue there. But anyway, the major problem with the Labour Party it was always a conservative party. It was never a socialist party. It was a party of the British Empire. And actually that explains, I mean, Becky's touched on it, why in fact Corbyn was brought down. Because if you remember, repeatedly it was said in terms of the anti-Semitism that the Jewish Labour movement was the Jewish section of the Labour Party. And that was fundamentally dishonest. It never was the Jewish section of the Labour Party. If you go back to 1921, when it affiliated, it was admired because it was a colonizing party, and colonization was seen as a great thing, a healthy thing, a way of renewing, for instance, the Jewish people. You should look at, there's a quote from Ramsay MacDonald about, I get sick of Jewish plutocrats who make me anti-Semitic, but these healthy colonizers are a different thing entirely. He simply didn't see it was Palestinians because, of course, natives disappeared before his eyes. And that ran through Labour's history. Attlee, I mean, everyone speaks highly of Attlee. And yet, I mean, Ken Loach even produced a Spirit of 45 film, which didn't once mention the other side of the Attlee government, which was its imperialist record. It is a fact, and people don't seem to recognise it, that the reforms that people talk about and which we all value, the National Health Service and so on and so forth, they were essentially bought by increased exploitation and repression abroad. Repression abroad funded reforms at home, the super exploitation of Malaya, and then the counterinsurgency war there, or the increased repression in Ghana and elsewhere in Africa, which the tying of all economies to the sterling pool, and so on. So Labour had those antecedents. It was created by a very conservative trade union bureaucracy, which always wanted to ensure that it couldn't get out of hand. And if we look again historically, the Labour Party was never part of some of the very biggest movements in British history. For example, the anti-fascist struggle in the 1930s. The Labour Party expelled people. Honorin Bevan was expelled. Cripps was expelled. I think even Michael Foot was expelled because they joined with the Communist Party in the Popular Front. Or another mass movement was the anti-poll tax campaign, which I think we all remember. I mean, the Labour Party didn't support it. It said you should pay, you should obey the law. So I think this is the problem with the Labour Party, that it's never been a movement party. It's always turned its face against it. Corbyn was elected by almost a freak, in a sense that, morons voted for him, as Margaret Beckett put it when she described herself, that they thought they'd give him a chance, not realizing he could take it and win. And then, the PLP reacted furiously. Corbyn managed to resist it, defeat Owen Smith, and then went on triumphantly to 2017. But after that, of course, the right girded its loins and went back on the attack with a vengeance. And we saw what happened in 2019. The right wing ensured that Labour would lose. They wanted him to lose, just as I want Starmer to lose now in the Batley and Spen by-election, for example. Unless the left, this is the other thing, the left hasn't had the same backbone, hasn't had the same independence as the right. It hasn't had the same determination. Historically, the left has always fallen in with the right and been offered crumbs, a few minor posts in government, etc. It's never stood up because it doesn't have independent politics, class politics, is what I'm talking about. So I don't think that, I mean, we're all fighting. I mean, I was expelled, as people will be aware, but I don't think that the campaigns will be successful. But the real problem is that the right have nothing to say. And you can see that with Starmer. It's not just because he's a totally inadequate personality, which he is, but he actually doesn't genuinely have anything to say. So people will say, yes, you're like every other party. And it's coming, the chickens are coming home to roost as he now is managing to lose the Muslim vote, in addition to the Scottish vote and the working class vote. So, I mean, where Labour goes from here, who knows? Thank you.
Terry?
Oh, hold on. Sorry, I was just switching from my phone to the laptop. I've just come in. I've been following the meeting whilst working doing my gardening business for the last hour. I've had my phone in my back pocket and in the front of the van, driving about and listening to everybody. And I've just managed to get in the house and switched over to the desk, to the desktop. So that was good timing. Whoever unmuted me just at that point, but unfortunately the phone was going. So a bit like Tony, I've been picking up bits and pieces, but I have been here from the start. I listened to the young lady who spoke at the start, Marina Prentoulis, and she made some fantastic points. Just I don't know how much time I've got here. I can tend to warble on a bit. I'll try and be brief as I can. But just listen to Tony there. I want to come back to a couple of things Marina said as well, and a few other Becky. But Tony said about the aberration. I can see where he's coming from. Like the Corbyn thing won't happen again. I'm a bit of a sort of eternal optimist, me, right? I joined the Labour Party in 2015, September 2015, at the age of almost 55, having never voted in my life before. Ex-Royal Navy, Northern Ireland, you can hear from my accent, so I was brought up in the Troubles in the 70s in Northern Ireland. Never trusted any politicians in my life. Tony's right, the British establishment was, Labour Party would have been to me would have been a representation of that. So I wouldn't have been interested in them, apart from the fact that they might have been a little bit different than the Tories and maybe occasionally had a bit of a conscience, possibly, but that would be about it. But Corbyn changed everything for me. And so to go back to what Tony said about the aberration, I'm sorry, Tony, I don't agree with you. I can see where you're coming from, but I don't agree. I can't agree with you. Basically, I can't find it in myself to agree with you, because I have been inspired for the first time in my life, and not just me, if it had just been me and a handful of other people who might not be so positive about it, but there was hundreds of thousands of people like me who returned to the Labour Party, and people like me who came in for the first time. So to quote Corbyn, and this is coming back to a little bit to what Marina was saying at the beginning, and one of the reasons I came into the Labour Party, it's about the movement thing. Corbyn, one of Corbyn's things that attracted me to him was his leadership style, his empowerment. You go back to Glastonbury and things like that, and when Corbyn got on the stump, as they call it in political speak, you know, when he went on the campaign trail in 2017, he was able to cut through the media spin, and people could actually see him and hear what he was saying, etc. And that was what cut the lead down from whatever, some stupid 20-odd figure, to almost like level pegging by the time the election came. And as we all know, I think Norman alluded to it, a couple of other people have alluded to it earlier, the Parliamentary Labour Party and some of the sycophantic officials within the Labour Party up and down the country did everything in their power to undermine the thing from start to finish. And so despite all of that, we almost like pulled it off in 2017. So I think that there is, so just going back to what Corbyn said, it's not me that they're afraid of, it's you. And that, to me, that was the most telling thing. And I think that's the key thing about the movement, which Marina was talking about earlier. We did get deflected. I think the PLP made this battle into, they changed our focus away from how we connect. Marina talked about we have to change how we connect with people, the public. It was as if we'd forgot about the public. We were too busy fighting amongst ourselves, trying to win control in the Labour Party, that the thing that we should have been able to focus on was actually the communities and the public at large and get them involved. That's why it didn't become a movement in the way that we hoped it did, because that battle was shifted. The PLP and the media, establishment media, helped them to make sure that people like me spent most of my time fighting my local bloody chair to get membership data, to get people to come to social events and to get onto ECs and to get campaigns and the street stalls and stuff and get out in the communities. And they were too busy fighting us and stopping us doing it. So I couldn't get out and do the thing that I wanted to do, which is what Corbyn was telling us, inspiring us to do, was to be empowered and to go out and empower other people. So I think it will happen again, but I think it'll happen again if we make it happen. And I say us, not some shining knight in shining armor coming over the horizon and saving us like a savior. Okay, it's down to us. It's down to the individuals. It's down to local leaders, to people to go out into the communities. The Labour in Exile Network is a good movement. I mean, I'm part of it, so I might be a bit biased, but it's a good movement because we're doing things like, we're trying to do that. We're trying to do things like shadow CLPs, which is to get people who are inside the party, outside the party, people in the local communities, to get involved in socialist values and socialist issues in the communities. And that's where I think we need to connect with people. I think Marina alluded to that. But another big thing that I would like to mention, to me personally, which I think is a massive issue, is not just about connecting, but how we connect. I heard a man earlier, I think his name's Eric Davis, talking about all these great policies that we have, and we do. You know, the nationalisation, this is what the young people want to hear. The messages are great, the policies are fantastic, but I think that where we fall over is how we transmit that, the success of reaching that message. There may be great policies, but how do we connect? How do we resonate with the public? And I think this is where the Labour Party falls over. As someone who came in ex-military, I suppose, might have something to do with it, I don't know. But the first thing I noticed when I came into the Labour Party was the manner in which people communicate with each other. It's all very dictatorial. It's all very, I'll tell you why you're wrong rather than ask you why you think you're right. It's all very sort of assumptive and, you know, above, like it's, you know, it's not very inclusive. And I noticed that happens within the Labour Party, and it then extends outside the Labour Party when you see people communicating on the doorstep and with campaigns and street stalls and stuff like that. Anywhere where there's an interface between the Labour Party and the public, I think that ailment, which is inability to communicate correctly and effectively, it extends and is projected out into the public domain. So I think that we have got the ability to overcome the divide and conquer strategy of the mainstream establishment. It's been mentioned here in this meeting. Marina again talked about how the media, we blame the media. The media is always going to be against anything that changes in society, that changes the status quo. She referenced Greece. It's the same in this country. So it's down to us to find a way to counteract that. And I think that I think there is a way to do that. And the way to do that is to engage properly with people, is to listen to what they say, not just say listen because it sounds good. It sounds like, oh, yeah, we're so listening, aren't we so lovely? No, actually listen, encourage people to speak, encourage them, and then ask them why they think that the way they do. And not just try and come up with solutions with them all the time. Build trust with people, bring people on board by making us out to be connected to the people. We're talking about being a working class movement. We have to behave like working class people. We have to resonate with those people, and we have to find a way to be on the same level as them, not above them, not superior to them, right? We have to be on the same level as them, and the way we're on the same level with them is to associate with them, identify with them, resonate with them, ask them questions, listen to the answers, and then ask them another question about the answer they gave you, and do that until you gain trust, because the establishment has made us out. If you look at the way they smeared Corbyn, the onslaught that went after 2017 was scared the life out of them. They thought they were going to bloody lose, and I was thinking, my God, they're going to come after us like crazy now. It's going to be the big guns next time if we don't do this. And that's what they did. And that's what they did to Corbyn. And so, and they do it to us, and they do it to the public. The divide and conquer strategy operates in the public. So when we go on the doors, when we meet people in the streets, we don't give them the impression that the media is telling them that we're supposed to be, this arrogant, lefty sort of socialist, whatever it is, negativity. We have to give a different impression. The way we give a different impression is by associating and identifying with the people that we say we want to represent, not try and be somebody different to them. That's all. Thank you.
Mute. Can we go back to Marina now? Thank you very much, Terry. If we go back to Marina and ask her to round us up a bit, or to comment on what she's heard from us, and then we'll say good night. Okay. All right.
Yes.
Thank you, Marina.
I open the camera again. Thank you, Terry, so much that you said the young lady. I'm so many years past from that. Thank you. It must be the light. I cannot tell you my age because we are recording. So, but I agree with Terry quite a lot in what he said. But I want to add something, that we have to agree that part of the left, at least, is very elitist and very preaching. Some of them, I cannot take them at all. They come and they really don't want to listen to anybody. They just come to give you a speech which is pre-prepared. They don't listen to you and they don't connect. And this is also why populism, because this elitism, that you don't like the people apart from the dogma that you have in mind, I cannot stand it. So I agree with what Terry said about how we connect. Tony, you were saying about there is no movement, but the problem with the Labour Party is that it had a movement. It was the union movement, trade union movement, I think. And I want to say something, and it's still going on about the movement and the trade union movement, as if 1980s never happened, and we haven't lost greatly on that front. Now, I remember one of the museums I love, it's in Manchester, the Populism Museum. And there was an exhibition there at some point, which was about death and trade unions. So it was showing how in the 19th century, well, early 20th, the people didn't have clothes, dark clothes, for example, to dress in funerals and stuff like that. And the union was holding the clothes, and you could borrow that, and you were buried with the union money. So the unions back then, they were part of the everyday experience of life and death of people, which this is not where we are, if you ask me now. I understand the role they play, how we are all members of unions, most probably, but it was a movement when there was this immediacy in being a member of the trade union and your everyday existence and life, which I think we have lost. We have lost because I said the 80s happened and there was quite many bad things happening there. So we have to create a different movement, and this is where I agree with quite a lot of you. In terms of Corbyn, I think Corbyn had something which was important, and it is important in populism as well. It's authenticity. I don't think he has the charisma in the traditional sense, but he was authentic. And I think this is what made people who were fed up of politicians, that they just come to take your votes. That's what attracted them to Corbyn. Of course, as I said, things have moved from there, and we have to think of right-wing populism and what they are doing, and they have nationalism. the right always plays the card of nationalism much better than anything that the left can do. I don't think the left should do anything on nationalism personally, but it is a very, very strong myth. It creates very strong emotions, the idea of the nation in people. Now, in Britain, of course, as you said, it's different. It's different to talk about patriotism in Greece, that it's a small country. It has always been manipulated by different forces and very different in Britain. So we have to think what is that we can and what connects us with people. And unfortunately, I don't think it's rationality and policies. I think it's also emotion. And you need a moment when the people are fed up and angry. What I think is going to happen is that this moment will happen again. All this time that we've been locked up, a lot of things happened, and we are going to pay for that. We also saw during this period a very important shift within the right-wing parties as well. And because we were talking about nationalizations, you remember a few days ago that the right-wing was talking about, how is it called, the great national rail. So they were talking about the creation of this new government state organization that is going to oversee the railways. And some people translated that as nationalizations, which of course it isn't, but it shows their flexibility, how flexible they are. While the left, in some ways, it is much more rigid, much more purist. They don't want to talk to people, they want to preach to people. They are afraid to move with the times and understand that the needs change and the way we connect and the way we create movements changes as well. Now, there were a lot of interesting things for me in terms of the nationalizations, the interesting things that they came out from the Corbyn era. It wasn't necessarily the idea of nationalizations, and I'm not sure how young people perceive that, but the proposals, the economic proposals that they came from John McDonnell's office were quite interesting, because it wasn't these things, oh, let's nationalize. It was how the people will be involved in this, how we will have more participation, how these companies will belong to us. I'm saying that because, again, the Labour Party uses always the idea of nationalizations. But nationalization and state-owned things, it doesn't mean the same thing for everybody. In Greece, the first nationalizations and state companies were created by the right. So John McDonnell was doing something, for me, much more radical in terms of these proposals. Things will belong to us and we will control them, which is something further. We will be engaged and communities will have a share in that. Why I'm saying that? I'm saying that in order to show that we need to talk to people, we need to understand people, we need to understand that ideas that sometimes they are good within the left, they are not necessarily convincing with people, and also that we need a moment, and I think this moment will happen because I believe public ownership. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Wanda. And I think this moment will happen because of the pandemic, because of other reasons as well. There will be a moment. What it frightens me is that we may lose the next moment. Final bit, which I forgot to say. I find the Labour Party very scary, and I find it very scary because I've met quite a lot of young people, and the professionalization that exists within the Labour Party, I cannot believe it. So you have all these people who say, oh, fantastic, they are activists, and they are all there for jobs. In the previous leadership, they were wearing suits. In the Corbyn period, they were not wearing suits, but they were not activists. They wouldn't do things if they were not paid, if this wouldn't put them in the good books of somebody and so on. And this, I think, in Britain is a problem. For within the Labour Party, that you have this professionalization and people are so much into getting jobs, but also outside the Labour Party and movements, that a lot, again, of NGOs and things like that, it's a sector, employment sector, And the idea of what it means to be an activist, to be engaged in politics and wanting to contribute has changed quite a lot. And this, for me, because I'm not that young, it's quite scary. Anyway, I think I should stop here. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me, and thank you for...
Thank you very much, Marina. We all thank you
Yes,
greatly
thank
for
you.
coming on.
Thank you very
And
much.
before we go, can I just once again recommend Marina's recent book, which is called Left Populism in Europe, Lessons from Jeremy Corbyn to Podemos, published by Pluto Press. There it is. Very nice. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night. Good night.
Thank you, and it has been a pleasure, really. And thank you for your opinions as well. They make me think, and I hope we can do some stuff together as well, all of us.
Right.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marina. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming.